Caves have always fascinated us, mysterious, dark, and untouched by time, but behind their natural beauty lies unimaginable danger. For thrill-seekers and explorers, caves offer the ultimate test of endurance. Yet for some, that test ends in tragedy. In this video, we're diving into the 5 most brutal cave deaths ever recorded. Stories so chilling, they'll make you think twice before stepping into the dark. On the night of November 24, 2009, 26-year-old medical student John Edward Jones descended into the Nutty Putty Cave with his brother and friends. He was home from Virginia, visiting family for the holiday, and it had been years since he'd last gone caving, a tradition he'd once enjoyed in his youth. The cave, with its twisting tunnels and narrow squeezes, was popular among Boy Scouts and thrill seekers. To many, it was a harmless challenge, but that night for John, it would become a tomb. The group began their exploration around 8 p.m., maneuvering through a tight chute known as the Big Slide. As the thrill escalated, John, his brother, and 2 others veered off from the main party in search of a notorious passage called the Birth Canal, a tight, claustrophobic squeeze that had been navigated by many before. John went in head first through what he believed was the right tunnel. He sucked in his chest and pushed forward, inch by inch, but it wasn't the birth canal. It was a dead-end fissure, a terrifying 10 by 18-inch vertical crack about 400 feet from the entrance, angling sharply downward at 70 degrees. And John was now hopelessly stuck, wedged upside down, with the cold rock pressing against his body from all sides. At first, he didn't panic. He thought he could wiggle free. His younger brother tried desperately to pull at his legs, but the deeper reality quickly set in. John was trapped, swallowed by the cave. There was no turning back, no space to breathe, no room to shift his body. And worst of all, he was upside down, a position that the human body cannot tolerate for long without deadly consequences. Rescue crews were called. What followed was a desperate, round-the-clock operation involving more than 100 people. They crawled into that dark abyss with drills, pulleys, ropes, and hope. One of the first to reach him was Susie Motola, a petite caver who dropped everything to help. For 2 hours, she comforted John, trying to move him, reposition him, anything to buy time. One rescuer after another followed, working in rotating shifts, navigating the narrow hellscape just to get near him. To keep him fighting, they brought him a radio to speak with his wife. John tried to stay strong. He spoke about his kids, his faith, his will to survive. But gravity was not on his side. The blood pooling in his head, the organs shifting unnaturally, the suffocating compression. His body was slowly shutting down. After 19 grueling hours, the team built a pulley system and began to lift him. For a moment, it seemed hope was real. He moved slightly. The rope held. Then, in an instant, disaster. The system failed under the weight and strain. The rope snapped. John was slammed violently back into the hole. One rescuer was knocked unconscious by the recoil. When he came to, he told his father, another caver on site, "He's dying right now. He's got a heartbeat, but he's struggling to breathe." John's voice faded. His strength vanished. The last rescuer to reach him was Brandon Kowalis. By then, John was unresponsive. Brandon tried to check for vitals, struggling to steady his shaking hands while jammed between the cold, sharp rock. He listened with a stethoscope. Nothing. He reached for a pulse. Silence. A paramedic followed and confirmed what everyone feared. John Edward Jones was gone. But the tragedy didn't end there. His body, still wedged in the rock, was unrecoverable. The risk was too great, the passage too narrow. There was no way to bring him out without endangering more lives. In a quiet, heart-wrenching decision, the family agreed. The cave would become his final resting place. Explosives were used to collapse the chamber around his body. Concrete sealed every entrance. Nutty Putty Cave was closed forever, not just as a safety measure, but as a grave.
From Castleton set out the team of rescuers on their last bid to save Neil Moss. The young man was trapped far in Peak Cavern, a mile and a half from the entrance, 1,000 feet underground.
On March 22, 1959, 20-year-old Oxford student Neil Moss stepped into the ancient darkness of Peak Cavern in Derbyshire, England, unaware that he was walking into the pages of a tragedy that would haunt the caving world forever. Neil, a philosophy undergraduate at Balliol College, wasn't a reckless thrill-seeker. He was bright, composed, and fascinated by the subterranean world that stretched silently beneath Castleton's rolling hills. That day, he joined a small group of fellow cavers and ventured beyond the well-lit tourist paths, far past the comfort of daylight, almost a mile into the earth. their goal to explore an unexplored vertical shaft deep within the cavern system. Neil volunteered to go first. The shaft was narrow and unknown, but he pressed on, descending deeper in search of untouched passageways. Then something went horribly wrong. He became wedged, tight, 1,000 feet from the surface, trapped in a shaft that narrowed cruelly around him. The ladder above him had become blocked, likely by a dislodged rock, and the space was too tight for him to move. Panic set in. The rock pressed into his shoulders, his chest, his limbs, unyielding, suffocating. When word of his entrapment reached the surface, a massive rescue effort launched. What followed would become the most intense cave rescue mission England had ever seen. More than 200 people gathered, trained cavers, rescuers, villagers, many who had never been underground before. At first they tried ropes. Again and again they pulled, but the ropes kept snapping under the strain. The shaft was too slick, too cramped. Then came the hard decisions. In a desperate effort to free him, rescuers attempted to break his collarbones, hoping to reduce his body's width enough to wriggle him free. But even that wasn't enough. Time was running out, and worse, Neil was running out of air. Down in the shaft, he was breathing his own exhaled carbon dioxide, a deadly buildup in a space with no airflow. He began to lose consciousness. Each failed rescue attempt took a little more hope from those above. Then came June Bailey. Just 18, tiny and fearless, she volunteered to go down. She fit where others couldn't, and stayed underground with Neil for 6 long hours, whispering encouragement and trying everything she could. But eventually she too was forced back, driven away by the choking, foul air filling the shaft. Others followed, including caving veteran Bob Leakey, but the rock refused to let Neil go. By the morning of March 24th, more than 35 hours after he'd first gone in, Neil Moss was gone. His father had waited at the cave entrance throughout the ordeal. He'd heard every update, every failed attempt, every scream of rope and clatter of gear as rescue workers fought the earth itself. And when the worst news came, he made a quiet, agonizing decision. No more lives would be risked. Neil's body would remain where it was. A place meant for discovery had become a grave. There's something eerie about the silence underwater. The way the world seems to vanish, replaced by shadows and weightlessness. For Peter Verhul, that silence would become unbearable. In 1984, what began as a routine cave dive with friends in South Africa's Sterkfontein Caves turned into one of the most agonizing survival stories imaginable. A slow, haunting death, hidden deep beneath one of the most ancient places on Earth. Peter was just 29, filled with curiosity and a thirst for discovery. He wasn't the most experienced diver in the group, but his adventurous spirit pushed him forward. He and his 2 companions were attempting to determine the depth of a submerged cave lake known as Milner Hall, a dark, unexplored pocket of the earth where prehistoric fossils had been found and ancient secrets waited in still water. But beneath all that history, danger lurked. The plan was simple. Follow the guideline across the dive route and surface together. But Peter kept drifting from the path. Fascinated by the cave's mysterious channels, he broke protocol, once, then again. Both times his friends had to retrieve him, but the third time he vanished. He had let go of the guideline, wandered too far, and then realized he was lost. Panic sets in differently underwater. There's no screaming, no sprinting for help, only the deafening roar of your own breathing and the cold press of stone all around you. Peter swam blindly through the labyrinth of flooded tunnels, searching for any sign of escape or air. Somehow fate led him to a small, dry island, a rocky outcrop surrounded by water, isolated in pitch blackness. He was alive. He had air, but he was trapped. Peter waited. Hours turned into days. Somewhere above, people searched. Divers combed the submerged maze, unknowingly passing within 30 meters of him at one point, close enough to save him, yet worlds apart in the endless dark. He was alone, with nothing but his thoughts and the slow, cruel decay of starvation gnawing away at him. For 3 weeks, Peter clung to hope. He rationed his strength, probably listening for even the faintest splash or sound of movement. But the silence was endless. The darkness was absolute. There was no light to guide him out. Only the suffocating black of a world that had already swallowed him whole. And in that final stretch, when his body began to fail, Peter left behind a message. His last words, drawn with desperate fingers into the sand. I love you, Cheryl and Ma. By the time they found him, 6 weeks and 1 day after he vanished, Peter's body was skeletal, curled near a sump pool, still surrounded by darkness. His remains were discovered by dry cavers who found long-forgotten tunnels, etched with faint footprints leading to the secluded island. An autopsy would later confirm what rescuers already feared. Peter hadn't drowned. He hadn't suffocated. He had starved to death alone, in silence. Today, the Sterkfontein Caves are a place of scientific wonder. Tourists walk boardwalks above the excavation sites where ancient human ancestors were found. Mrs. Pless and Littlefoot, two of the oldest known hominids, rest nearby in fossilized memory. But Peter Verhul's story haunts those caves in a different way. His death didn't happen millions of years ago. It was recent, real, raw, because even with the best gear, training, and plans, caves don't forgive curiosity. They don't echo your cries. They keep their secrets, and sometimes they keep you too.
When 6 men entered a tight cave system to help out with some important mapping work, they thought they would be in for an adventurous day in the deep tunnels of Mosdale Caves. The harsh reality of what they would face is absolutely stunning.
It was midsummer in Yorkshire, 1967/deep beneath the moors. 10 young men stepped into the infamous Mosdale Caverns, Britain's most brutal cave system. They were driven not by fame or money, but by obsession, by the lure of discovery in a place so remote, so rarely seen, that more people had walked on the moon than reached its furthest points. Hours passed underground. The group split, as they often did. 4 turned back after a few hours, sensing enough was enough, but 6 kept going, pushing deeper, wriggling through the jagged marathon crawls, braving passages so tight you couldn't lift your head, where the only way forward was sideways in a stream. They laughed, they teased each other. There was talk of new chambers, new records, the thrill of the unknown just beyond the next bend. They were young, one just a teenager, the oldest barely 26, and believed they could beat the cave. After all, they had before. Then came the sound, a deep, sickening rumble, faint at first, then unmistakable, the kind of noise that steals the air from your lungs. Someone made a joke. Is that the stream going up? But no one laughed. Above them on the surface, a cloudburst had exploded without warning. Rain poured across the moorland, swelling the waters of Mosdale Beck, a stream that disappeared directly into the mouth of the cave. The entrance was now a funnel, and all that water was rushing down, fast. Inside, the 6 cavers were already too far in. Over 3 kilometers from daylight, they had nowhere to go. The crawlways began to fill. The water crept up their bodies inch by inch. There was no standing, no room to run, just narrow tunnels, low ceilings, and the roar of water drowning out every desperate breath. They crawled faster, hearts pounding, but they knew this was the nightmare, every caver's silent fear, the flood, the cave closing in, the realization that no skill, no experience, no strength could save them now. On the surface, Morag Forbes, one of the 4 who had exited early, ran back to check the entrance. She found it submerged, sealed shut by the rising stream. Panic surged. She turned and sprinted across 4 kilometers of harsh moorland to raise the alarm. Help arrived swiftly, but nature had other plans. Rescue crews couldn't even enter. The water was too high, too savage. They dug trenches, redirected streams, prayed for the rain to stop. But time dragged on. It wasn't until the following day that rescuers could finally squeeze into the flooded cave. The mood was grim. They found 5 bodies deep inside, crumpled in the far marathon crawls, the same winding tunnels the boys had once passed through with laughter. A final search party led by the legendary Bob Leakey, the cave's original explorer, hoped the 6th man might have found higher ground. But hope, like oxygen, was running out. The last body was found the next day. There was no recovery. The risk was too great. The coroner made the painful call. The cave would be sealed, not with ceremony, but with concrete. The dead would remain beneath the earth, buried where they fell, in the cold grip of the cave they had tried to conquer. The disaster sent shockwaves through the British caving community. It was the worst of its kind. The Mosdale Caverns, with their unpredictable waters and cruel terrain, claimed 6 lives in minutes. And yet, even now, their story echoes through the limestone. A plaque above the entrance stands as a silent tribute. On the moor, a solitary cairn marks the ground above their tomb. It reads simply, "Over the place in the cave where the bodies were found."
February 6, 2014, 5 divers cut a triangular hole in the ice on a river in the Plura Valley of central Norway. This 35-meter wide river rises abruptly out of the ground from a strange pond known by locals as Plura.
The icy silence of Plura Valley concealed a secret world beneath its frozen skin, a vast, black maze of water, stone, and bone-numbing cold. In February 2014, 5 Finnish divers, bonded by years of dangerous dives, cut a triangular hole into the thick ice covering the spring known as Plura. One by one, they slipped into the mouth of darkness, the cold water closing over them like a tomb. They were not thrill-seekers. They were explorers, brothers in spirit, if not in blood. Their goal was Steinugelflaget, a cave accessible only by an underwater path plunging more than 130 meters deep through jagged, freezing tunnels. It wasn't just a dive. It was one of the most dangerous in the world. A 5-hour journey through the Earth's lungs, breathless and unforgiving. Patrick Gronkvist and Jari Hotarinen led the way. For Jari, this would be his first full traverse. Behind them, 3 more followed after allowing sediment to settle, a standard practice. Each diver operated alone, but together. No commander, just mutual respect. For nearly an hour, they swam deeper, their scooters humming, torches casting eerie beams into blackness. Then something went wrong. When Gronkvist looked back, Hotarinen was gone. He retraced his path, heart pounding. In the narrowest part of the cave, he found him, tangled in a cord signaling distress. He was panicking, breathing too fast, CO2 poisoning. Gronkvist handed him a spare cylinder, but in switching mouthpieces, Jari swallowed water. He drowned, right there in front of his best friend. Gronkvist had to push forward. He had already spent 20 minutes at lethal depth. The decompression stops ahead would be brutal. He swam on, alone. Behind him, Vesa Rantanen arrived and froze. Jari's body blocked the tunnel. He had 2 options, retreat or push past his dead friend. He chose forward. It took 15 agonizing minutes to get through. His gas supply thinned. The delay added hours to his decompression. He surfaced early and paid for it with the bends. The last 2, Jari Usimaki and Kai Kankanen, were still behind. Usimaki panicked at the sight of the body. He lost control. CO2 poisoning claimed him too. Kankanen tried to help, but turned back. Disoriented and exhausted, he surfaced 11 hours after entering, smashing through newly frozen ice. 2 were dead. The survivors, Gronkvist, Rantanen, and Kankanen, were broken. The cave was sealed. Recovery was deemed impossible. But that wasn't the end. Gronkvist, a firefighter, promised Hotarinen's widow, "We'll bring them back." It was their code. No one gets left behind. They would return, in secret. No fanfare, no permission, just resolve. They trained, prepared. 50 gas cylinders, a floating decompression habitat, a 5-day mission planned with surgical precision. March 22, 2014. They returned to Plura. The water swallowed them again. Kankanen resurfaced. He couldn't do it. Gronkvist and Sami Pakarinen dove on. Their torches lit the shadows. Then, Usimaki, still silent. A few meters further, Hotarinen, right where he had fallen. Sami cut him free. Gronkvist latched him to a scooter and towed him up, through the flooded tomb to Steinugelflaget. Waiting. Rantanen. "I've thought about this every night since I left him here," Gronkvist said. 1 more remained. The next day, they went back for Usimaki. His body was bloated, unstable. A section of the cave collapsed on Sami, but they made it. Both were recovered. 2 body bags. A moment of silence. A brotherhood fulfilled, they informed the authorities. Technically, they had broken the law, but no charges came. In Finland, they were honored. A film diving into the unknown told their story. But this was not a hero's tale. It was grief, sacrifice, sisu, Finnish grit in the face of loss. Some, like British diver Rick Stanton, admired their effort but questioned the cost. "This shouldn't have happened," he said. But ask these men why they returned, and they won't offer cliches. Just truth. You don't leave a friend behind. And as the ice closed once more over Plura, the cave gave them back what it had taken. Not peace, but something like it.